Attention! This video will stop your heart, send chills down your spine. A terrifying, mysterious murder journey. If you're brave enough, watch it to the end. Are you ready? Let's begin. A single light bulb flickered in the dark stairwell. Footsteps over broken glass cut through the night's silence like a knife. The smell of mold and rotted wood seeping from the building filled throats with a burning sensation. At the bottom of the stairs, on the cracked marble floor, a body lay motionless. Hair covered the face, but the open eyes stared at the ceiling, frozen, lifeless, eyes that no longer saw anything. The right hand's palm faced upward, and between the fingers, a small white piece of paper was tightly clutched. The ink stain on the paper, barely visible in the darkness, seemed like a final message. Blood slowly spreading around the body filled the cracks in the marble floor, expanding like a black map. And in that silence, there was only one sound coming from the depths of the building, a dripping faucet, playing death's music with its regular, gloomy rhythm. The old apartment building on Chicago's north side was awakening with the first light of dawn. November's cold wind entered through broken windows, whistling through the corridors. The building, which had seen bright days years ago, had now become a symbol of abandonment and decay. Bricks on the exterior facade had shifted, one of the fire escapes had completely detached and was leaning against the adjacent building. The ground floor stores had long since closed, their windows boarded up with wooden planks. Graffiti-covered walls were proof of how life slowly faded in this forgotten corner of the city. In the early morning hours, mailman Edward Martinez froze at the sight behind the entrance door as he approached the building for his routine delivery. His hands began to tremble. Letters fell from his hands to the ground. For several seconds, he remained motionless as if paralyzed, then staggered backward and pulled out his cell phone. His fingers were moving so fast and uncontrollably that he misdialed 911 3 times. When the connection was finally made, his voice was hoarse and broken, words tumbling together. Within 15 minutes, the building was surrounded by police vehicles. Red and blue lights reflected off the building's worn facade. Yellow tape had begun to be stretched. Detective Rachel Morrison was 42 years old, a seasoned homicide detective with 17 years of experience. She had pulled her long black hair into a tight bun as usual. As she approached the scene in her dark gray pants and black trench coat, her facial expression was one of complete professionalism. But inside, she felt that familiar unease she experienced at every new crime scene. Her 17 years in this job had perhaps made her immune to ordinary murders, but whenever she saw the violence the human body could endure, the disgust she felt on her first day still remained fresh. Beside her was Detective Marcus Webb. At 36 years old, with his short-cropped brown hair and sharp chin, he had the classic American cop look. He was athletically built and his movements were quick. Unlike Rachel, Marcus was less experienced, but he compensated for this deficiency with his intuition and careful attention to detail. The pair had been working together for 3 years and had developed a wordless communication between them. When they entered through the front door, the first thing that filled their nostrils was the smell of mold and rotted wood. Then came the metallic smell of blood, fresh, harsh, and nauseating. Rachel put on her gloves and approached the stairs. There, 3 steps down, lay the young woman's body. The body was positioned in such a way that she had clearly fallen from a height. But Rachel's experienced eyes immediately noticed the abnormality. The fall position was too neat. Arms were at a specific angle. Hair seemed to be carefully arranged to cover the face. Marcus climbed to the top of the stairs and looked down. Could she have been pushed from here? Or had she jumped? But the stairwell structure was too narrow for a simple fall or jump. Had someone moved her here after she died? When the forensics team arrived, work began. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded, samples collected. Dr. Patricia Hayes was the Cook County medical examiner. She was 60 years old, and with her gray hair and sharp gaze behind thick glasses, she began examining the body. With gloved hands, she touched the body, checked body temperature, assessed rigor mortis. Time of death approximately 8 to 10 hours ago, Dr. Hayes said in a cold tone. But she didn't die from the fall. Neck is broken, but this occurred before the fall. There are signs of manual strangulation. Distinct finger marks on the neck. Someone strangled her and then left her here. Rachel crouched down and examined the body's right hand. The small piece of paper clutched in the palm was soaked with blood. She carefully removed it with tweezers. There were a few words written in ink on the paper, but they were difficult to read due to the effects of blood and moisture. However, one name could be made out: Sarah. "Who is Sarah?" Marcus murmured. Rachel placed the paper in a clear evidence bag. "We need to get this to the lab. Maybe we can read more." The body's identity was determined by a driver's license from her wallet. Emily Garrett, 27 years old. Her address was listed as a small apartment a few blocks from this building. In her photo, she was smiling, young, vibrant, and full of hope. Now, that smile was frozen forever. Emily Garrett's apartment was a 20-minute walk from the crime scene. The building was newer and well-maintained, but the neighborhood was still one of Chicago's low-income areas. The door to apartment 3B on the third floor was locked. They entered with a key obtained from the building manager. The apartment was small but tidy. A studio. In the kitchen corner was a dishwasher, a small stove, and an old refrigerator. In the living area, a fold-out couch and a small coffee table in front of it. On the walls, a few posters and family photos. But what caught Rachel's attention was the sewing machine in one corner of the room and the piles of fabric around it. She was a seamstress, Marcus said, examining a half-finished dress on the table. Rachel examined the surroundings more carefully. On the sewing table was a notebook with customer orders written in it. Names, phone numbers, measurements, and delivery dates. The last entry was from 3 days ago. A cocktail dress for Mrs. Patricia Donnelly. A note read, "Delivered." But what really caught Rachel's interest was a special notebook she found in one of the sewing table drawers. The cover was leather-bound and the inside was filled with handwriting. It was a diary. Rachel began carefully turning the pages. The first pages were ordinary records of daily life. Work orders, shopping lists, notes about meeting friends. But in pages from about 6 months ago, the tone began to change. Emily had started writing about her missing sister. "I must find Sarah. It's been 2 years now and the police are doing nothing. Mom cries every day. Dad doesn't even talk anymore. But I know Sarah didn't disappear. Someone took her. Someone is keeping her somewhere. Or... No, I can't allow that thought." The following pages grew darker. Emily had reinvestigated Sarah's last days before her disappearance, listed the places she went, the people she saw, tried to develop her own theories. One page was particularly striking. "Today I met with a psychic. Her name is Margaret Hollis. A strange woman. Her house smells of incense and there are candles everywhere. But what she said about Sarah. I can't believe it, but at the same time I'm hopeful. Margaret said Sarah is still alive. But also said she's in danger. In a dark place, near water, she said. There are so many places near water in Chicago. But at least it's something. A clue." Later entries showed that Emily had met with Margaret Hollis repeatedly. The psychic gave new information each time. But these were always vague and cryptic statements. Still, Emily was hopeful each time and conducted new searches. One of the last entries caused Marcus to read aloud. Now I'm certain. Margaret really knows something. Today she told me that Sarah was with a red-haired man. And this man hurt Sarah. But Margaret won't say more. She wants money from me. Says we need more sessions. I don't have money, but I have to find it. I'll do anything for Sarah. Rachel and Marcus exchanged glances. A psychic. A missing sister. And now a dead woman. We need to find this Margaret Hollis, Rachel said. During the detailed search of the apartment, a few more things emerged. On Emily's computer were messages she had written to missing persons forums. She had shared Sarah's photos, asking if anyone had seen her. Also, in Emily's bank statements, regular payments made to Margaret Hollis over the past 6 months were visible. Amounts ranging from $200 to $500 each time. But the most disturbing discovery was in a box hidden in the bedroom closet. The box was filled with old photos and letters. And among them were love letters written to Emily from an unidentified man. There was no signature. Only, "Your shadow," was written. The letters were romantic but also disturbing. They were full of possessive expressions. "You are mine, Emily. Only mine. No one else can understand you like I do. No one else can love you like I do." When Marcus read the letters, he got goosebumps. "This isn't healthy," he said. "This is obsessive. Do these letters signed Shadow disturb you too? Share your thoughts in the comments." Rachel nodded. "We need to talk to Emily's friends and family. Who could this Shadow be?" Emily Garrett's family lived in a low house on Chicago's west side. The house was a small detached structure from the 1950s. The yard was neglected, the grass long and yellowed. When the doorbell rang, the person who answered was a middle-aged woman. Diane Garrett was 54 years old but looked much older than her age. Her hair had completely turned white and her face was covered with deep wrinkles. The purple circles under her eyes were traces of sleepless nights and crying. When Rachel and Marcus showed their badges, Diane's face fell. She already knew. The news had spread. But still, seeing the police, reality hit her in the face once again. "Emily," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're sorry, Mrs. Garrett," Rachel said in a soft tone. "May we come in?" Diane stepped back and let them in. The inside of the house was dim and quiet. In the living room was an old sofa set and family photos hanging on the wall. In the photos were images from happier days. A young couple and 2 little girls. In one photo, they were laughing on the beach. In another, they were posing with presents in front of a Christmas tree. "My husband isn't home," Diane said, sitting down. "He went out after hearing the news. I don't think he'll come back today." Rachel sat across from her and took out her notebook. "Mrs. Garrett, we need to ask some questions about Emily. I know this is a very difficult time, but your help is very important to us." Diane nodded, tears beginning to stream from her eyes. "Did Emily tell you anything recently about your missing sister Sarah?" Diane's face crumpled with pain. Sarah. Emily could never forget Sarah. When Sarah disappeared 2 years ago, Emily blamed herself. Sarah was supposed to stay at Emily's apartment that night. But Emily told her she couldn't come. She had to finish an order. So Sarah decided to go home alone. And she never came back. Do you know anything else about Sarah? Any signs she was threatened before she disappeared? Diane shook her head. No. Sarah was a normal girl. She was 25 years old. She worked at a cafe. She didn't have a boyfriend at the time. She just disappeared. As if she was erased from the face of the earth. Marcus interjected. Did Emily have a boyfriend recently? Diane hesitated. I don't know. Emily had been very withdrawn in recent months. She didn't talk to me like she used to. But sometimes I'd see her messaging on her phone and she'd smile. Maybe she did. But she never told me. Have you ever heard the name Margaret Hollis? Rachel asked. Diane's face tensed. That psychic? Yes, Emily talked about her. I told her not to go but she didn't listen. Emily was desperate. She had lost hope of finding Sarah and that woman gave her new hope. But I think that woman is a fraud. Rachel took notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Diane remained silent for a long time, then whispered, Was Emily murdered? Rachel nodded. Yes. We're conducting a homicide investigation. Diane leaned forward and brought her hands to her face. Her chest heaved with sobs. I've lost both my daughters. Both of them. One missing, the other dead. How can this be? How? Rachel approached her and touched her shoulder. She said comforting words but knew that no words could ease this pain. Marcus was silently examining the room and looking at the photos on the wall. Sarah and Emily were side by side in one photo. They looked similar. Both had brown hair, slender builds, and beautiful faces. But that light in their eyes was gone now. As they were leaving the house, Diane stopped them at the door. Please, she said in a trembling voice. Find whoever killed Emily. And if possible, find Sarah too. Dead or alive, I want to find her. I need to know now. Rachel made her a promise. But inside, she knew how naive such promises were. Sometimes the truth never came out. Sometimes missing people remained lost forever. Margaret Hollis's address was easily found in Emily's diary. It was in the Hyde Park area on Chicago's South Side. The house was Victorian style, old but well maintained. It had a porch with black iron railings and the windows were covered with thick curtains. Above the door hung a small sign, Spiritual Advisor, Margaret Hollis. When Rachel and Marcus knocked on the door, a slight smell of incense came from inside. The woman who opened the door appeared to be in her 60s. Her long gray hair fell to her shoulders and she was wearing a purple blouse. Around her neck was a crystal necklace and countless rings on her fingers. Her eyes swept over the visitors with a sharp, assessing gaze. Can I help you? She said, her voice quite calm. Rachel and Marcus showed their badges. Chicago Police Department. We'd like to ask you a few questions. A slight tension appeared on Margaret's face but she immediately concealed it. Of course, come in. The inside of the house was decorated beyond expectations. Candles were burning in every corner. On the walls were mystical symbols, moon and star motifs. In the living room was a round table surrounded by velvet-covered chairs. In the center of the table stood a crystal sphere. Margaret seated them and sat across from them. What's this about? She asked, placing her hands on the table. Do you know Emily Garrett? Rachel asked. Margaret's face changed for a moment. Whether it was surprise or something else wasn't clear. Emily? Yes, I know her. She was a client. What happened? Emily Garrett was murdered last night, Marcus said, watching the woman's reaction. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. My God. This is terrible. How did it happen? That's what we're investigating, Rachel said. Emily was meeting with you regularly. About her missing sister Sarah. Can you tell us what you told her? Margaret took a deep breath and closed her eyes, as if gathering memories. Emily came to me a few months ago. She said Sarah was missing and asked for my help to find her. I did what I could. I connected with the spirits and relayed the messages I received about Sarah to Emily. What kind of messages? Marcus asked, his voice skeptical. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at him. I felt that Sarah was still alive. But she was in a dark place. A basement or enclosed area. And she was near water. A river or lakeside. Also, there was a man who harmed her. Someone with red hair. Rachel took notes. Anything else? Emily was very desperate. Finding Sarah was everything to her. I tried to give her hope. But... Margaret paused. But? Rachel pressed. But in our last sessions, I began to sense a dark energy around Emily. As if someone was watching her. I told her this. I advised her to be careful, not to meet with people she didn't trust. Did Emily tell you who this watcher might be? Rachel asked. Margaret shook her head. No. But Emily had a secret. I could feel it. Something she didn't tell me. Maybe a relationship, maybe something else. Marcus leaned forward. Ms. Hollis, do you really know what happened to Sarah? Or are these just things you made up to string Emily along? Margaret's eyes hardened. I'm not a fraud, detective. I have real abilities. I help people. You took money from Emily, Marcus said. Regular payments. Thousands of dollars in total. My services aren't free, Margaret said in a cold tone. Everyone gets paid for their work. So do I. Rachel intervened, her tone softer. Ms. Hollis, was there anyone in Emily's life who could be dangerous? Someone who could harm her? Margaret thought for a long time. Emily was very tense at our last meeting. She kept looking at her phone. As if she was waiting for a message from someone. And she told me, I'm very close to learning the truth. When I asked what she meant, she said, I almost know what happened to Sarah. But she didn't give any more details. Do you think Emily might have learned what happened to Sarah? Rachel asked. Margaret shook her head. I don't know. But if she did learn, this might have put her in danger. Is Margaret Hollis really a psychic, or just a fraudster taking advantage of Emily's desperation? What do you think? Maybe whoever harmed Sarah realized Emily had learned too much. Rachel and Marcus looked at each other. This made sense. If Sarah's disappearance was a murder or kidnapping and Emily had learned the truth, the killer might have wanted to silence her. One last question, Rachel said. Do you know if Emily had a boyfriend called Shadow? Margaret frowned. Shadow? No, I haven't heard such a name. But I remember Emily mentioning a boyfriend. Once, she said, someone really understands me. But she didn't give a name. The Chicago Police Department Criminalistics Laboratory was in the city center. Here, collected evidence was analyzed, DNA tests were conducted, and forensic scientists helped solve murders. When Rachel and Marcus arrived at the laboratory, technician Amanda Lee greeted them. Amanda was a 30-year-old scientist of Asian descent. She had short-cropped black hair and framed glasses. She wore a white lab coat and held a tablet in her hand. I have some things to show you, Amanda said, taking them inside. First, she showed them the piece of paper found in Emily's hand. It was now under a glass plate, being examined with special lighting. Under UV light, the paper displayed different tones. The paper analysis gave interesting results, Amanda said. First of all, this isn't ordinary note paper. It's high-quality, cotton-based paper. The kind typically used for invitations or special correspondence. Ink analysis shows this was written with an expensive fountain pen. Rachel leaned forward and looked at the paper. The bloodstains had been cleaned and the writing appeared clearer. Next to the word Sarah, more could now be read: Sarah, Riverside Warehouse, RH. Who is RH? Marcus murmured. Amanda continued. Also, we found other fingerprints on the paper besides Emily's. Very faint, but there's a partial print. We entered it into the system but got no match. So this person hasn't been recorded before. Who do you think the initials RH belong to? Does any name come to mind? What about DNA? Rachel asked. We took tissue samples from under Emily's nails, Amanda said, scrolling through the tablet screen. There are signs of struggle. Emily tried to defend herself. We extracted a DNA profile but again, no match in the system. The attacker hasn't been in criminal records before. This made the investigation more difficult. If the killer was committing a crime for the first time, they might not be in the DNA database. There's one more thing, Amanda said, leading them to another part of the laboratory. Here, evidence collected from Emily's apartment was displayed. We examined those love letters you found in Emily's apartment. Paper analysis shows they're made from the same quality paper. And the ink is from the same fountain pen. So the same person wrote the piece of paper and the letters. Rachel's pulse quickened. So, Shadow might have written the note in Emily's hand? Probably, Amanda said. But there's something more interesting. On one of the letters, we found a very faint perfume scent. Men's cologne. And this perfume was also on Emily's body. Near the strangulation marks on her neck. Marcus was thoughtful. So shortly before Emily was killed, she was in close contact with this shadow person. Looks that way, Amanda said. Rachel thought back to Emily's diary. A secret relationship. Passionate but disturbing letters. And now, evidence that the same person might have killed Emily. One more thing, Amanda said one last time. We examined Emily's phone. Most messages were deleted but we did data recovery. And we found this. Amanda showed a messaging thread on the tablet screen. The messages came from an unregistered number. And the content was chilling. You belong to me, Emily. Don't tell others about us. This is our secret. Stop looking for Sarah. It will hurt you. I want to be with you. Every night. Every day. Forever. And the last message was from the morning of the day Emily was killed. We need to meet tonight. I know you have something to tell me. I'll be at the old warehouse. Come. Rachel and Marcus looked at each other in shock. Try to piece together the evidence the detectives found. The clues are slowly coming together. Old warehouse, Marcus said. Riverside Warehouse. Same as what's written on the piece of paper. He called Emily there, Rachel said. And after killing her there, he moved the body somewhere else. But why? Why didn't he leave the body at the scene? Amanda shrugged. That's your job. I only analyze evidence. Rachel picked up the phone and noted the number. We need to track this number. Who's using it, where? But they knew that if the killer was careful, tracking the number could be difficult. Prepaid phones were frequently used by criminals because they didn't require identification. Riverside Warehouse was in an abandoned industrial area next to the Chicago River. This building, once used as a port warehouse, had closed years ago and had now become only a shelter for rats and the homeless. Its exterior was covered with rusted metal sheets, its windows were broken, and its door was riddled with holes. Rachel and Marcus came to the warehouse with 2 patrol officers. It was sunset and the sky was covered with orange and red tones. But this beauty didn't soften the gloomy scene in front of the warehouse. They entered with their flashlights on. The air was humid and smelled of mold. The floors were covered with broken glass, old metal pieces, and trash. Some parts of the ceiling had collapsed and places where rainwater leaked were filled with puddles. This place is like a giant maze, Marcus said, turning his flashlight left and right. Rachel walked carefully, looking for footprints or any clues. As they progressed deeper into the warehouse, the darkness became more intense. Only the light from their flashlights illuminated their path. Then, inside a room, they saw something. On the floor were fresh blood traces. Not much blood, but distinctly human blood. And next to the bloodstains were signs of a struggle. Drag marks on the floor, footprints, and an overturned old box. "This is it," Rachel said. "Emily was killed here." The forensics team was called and the warehouse was scanned from top to bottom. Blood samples were taken, footprints were cast, and every inch was photographed. But the killer was careful. There was only Emily's blood. No other biological evidence could be found. However, in one corner of the room, Rachel made an important discovery. On the wall, written in simple letters, was a word, freedom. The writing looked like it had been written with a finger, and not ink, but blood. But was this Emily's blood or someone else's? "Let Amanda analyze this," Rachel said, taking a photo. Marcus continued to wander around the warehouse and went outside, to the riverbank. From here, Chicago's night lights could be seen. The river flowed silently and the wind blew cold. Marcus took a deep breath and thought. If Sarah was here, still here. "There's something here," shouted one of the patrol officers. Rachel and Marcus ran over. The officer had found something half covered with dirt outside the warehouse, at a point near the riverbank. A shovel was brought and digging began. And a few minutes later, the horrible truth emerged. Underground was a decomposed body. It had nearly become a skeleton. But from the clothing pieces and hair on it, the identity could be determined. Brown hair, women's clothing, and a small necklace, the letter S. Rachel's heart tightened. Sarah. She had finally been found. But not as Emily had hoped. Sarah was dead. When she disappeared 2 years ago, she had probably been killed shortly after. And all this time, while Emily searched for her, Sarah had been lying here, by the riverbank, underground. Dr. Patricia Hayes worked for hours examining Sarah Garrett's skeletal body. The skeletons had lost most soft tissue over time, but the bones still told many stories. When Rachel and Marcus arrived at the forensic laboratory, Dr. Hayes was ready to present her findings. She had pulled her gray hair into a bun and had settled her glasses firmly on her nose. In front of her were arranged photos of the body and X-ray images. Sarah Garrett, a woman between 23 and 27 years old, Dr. Hayes began. Based on the degree of skeletonization, I can say her death occurred approximately 2 years ago. The soil's moisture and environmental factors accelerated decomposition. Cause of death? Rachel asked. Dr. Hayes showed an X-ray image. Blunt trauma to the skull. Someone hit Sarah's head with a hard object. Probably a metal pipe or rod. The blow hit the temporoparietal region and the skull was fractured. Death was most likely instantaneous. Marcus took notes. Any other injuries? No bone fractures in defensive positions, Dr. Hayes said. This shows Sarah didn't expect the attack. She was probably hit from behind. Also, there's a slight abnormality in the cervical vertebrae. This suggests there might have been a strangulation attempt before or during the attack, but it's difficult to detect clear strangulation marks on the skeleton. Rachel was thoughtful. Sarah had been killed in a sudden attack. Was it planned or a sudden burst of rage? Is there any other evidence on the body? She asked. Small pieces of clothing remained, Dr. Hayes said. Jeans and a t-shirt. Also, the necklace around her neck. Besides these, no personal belongings. No bag, wallet, phone, none of them. Either the attacker took them or they're somewhere else. DNA match? Marcus asked. We extracted DNA from the bones, Dr. Hayes said. We compared it with samples taken from Diane Garrett. It's 99.9% likely this is Sarah Garrett. Rachel sighed. Emily's greatest fear had come true. Sarah was dead. And her killer had also killed Emily. Is there any trace of the killer on Sarah's body? Rachel asked. Dr. Hayes shook her head. The skeletonization is very advanced. We couldn't find DNA or tissue samples. But we're examining the clothing pieces. Maybe we'll find something there. The technical team had tracked the number that sent messages to Emily. As expected, it was a prepaid phone. But by chance, the last location where the phone was used could be determined. A location in northern Chicago, near Lincoln Park. Rachel and Marcus went to that area with the team. The location pointed to the front of a cafe. When they went inside, they talked to the cafe owner. Did they have security cameras? They did. And they had kept last week's recordings. The recordings were examined. And there, on the screen, a man was seen. He had entered the cafe, sat in a corner, busy with his phone. His face was clearly visible. A man in his 30s, red-haired, medium height. He was wearing a dark coat and jeans. That's him, Marcus said. We need to find this man. Facial recognition software was run on the image. And when the result came, everyone was surprised. The man was named Richard Hughes. 34 years old, living in Chicago, and there was nothing in police records. He had a clean history. But when social media accounts were examined, interesting details emerged. Richard Hughes was a software engineer. He worked at a large tech company. On his LinkedIn profile, he talked about professional photos and achievements. But his Instagram account was more private. The photos were mostly solo portraits, nature scenes, and occasionally images taken while working in cafes. But what caught attention were the accounts he followed. He was following Emily Garrett's Instagram account. And even more surprisingly, 2 years ago he had also followed Sarah Garrett. This can't be a coincidence, Rachel said. A red-haired man. Did the information Margaret gave turn out to be true? Or is this just a coincidence? Richard Hughes knew both Sarah and Emily. Marcus quickly found Richard's address. He lived in a chic apartment in North Chicago. Also, when vehicle records were checked, he owned a black Honda Civic. Let's get an arrest warrant immediately, Rachel said. But at this point, they needed to be careful. If Richard Hughes was the killer, he might try to escape or destroy evidence. The judge reviewed the evidence and issued an arrest warrant. A search warrant was also issued. Early the next morning, the SWAT team and detectives raided Richard Hughes's apartment. The door was broken and they entered quickly. Richard was asleep in his bed. He woke up with the sudden raid, surprised and scared. Don't move. Hands up, shouted the SWAT leader. Richard raised his hands, trembling. His eyes were wide open and his face showed an expression of fear and shock. He was handcuffed and taken downstairs to the waiting police car. A detailed search was conducted in his apartment. And the findings were disturbingly chilling. On the bedroom wall was a large board. And this board was covered with photos of Emily and Sarah. Sarah's missing person notices cut from newspapers, Emily's social media photos, even old family photos of the two together. Richard had written notes in his handwriting on the photos. Dates, places, events. Detailed records as if he had been watching both of them. Also, in a drawer, drafts of letters he had written to Emily were found. The same expensive paper, the same fountain pen. And the contents were identical to the letters he had sent to Emily. But the most horrifying discovery was in a box hidden behind the closet. Inside the box was a blood-stained metal pipe. And threads resembling Sarah's hair were stuck to the pipe. How did you feel when you learned that Richard Hughes was following both Sarah and Emily? Write to us in the comments. Rachel and Marcus took deep breaths as they stood in the apartment. Everything was clear. Richard Hughes had killed both Sarah and Emily. The interrogation room at Chicago Police Headquarters was a small, suffocating place. White walls, a one-way mirror, and a metal table in the middle. A chair on each side of the table. Richard Hughes was seated in the chair, handcuffed. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands were trembling. His lawyer hadn't arrived yet, but Richard seemed ready to talk. As if he wanted to unburden what was inside him. Rachel and Marcus sat across from him. On the table, evidence photos were laid out. Sarah's skeleton, Emily's body, the metal pipe, the letters, and that horrifying board. Rachel turned on the recording device and read the official procedures. Richard confirmed he understood his rights. "Richard," Rachel began, her voice calm but determined. "We have many things we want to ask you. And it will be best for both us and you if you tell us the truth." Richard bowed his head and placed his hands on the table. There was a long silence. Then, he began to speak in a trembling voice. I'm not a monster. I was just very lonely." Marcus leaned forward. "Tell us about Sarah Garrett. How did you meet her?" Richard closed his eyes, memories returning. "I met Sarah 2.5 years ago. She worked at a cafe. I went there every morning. I'd get coffee. And Sarah always smiled. She'd talk to me. I fell in love with her. But she only saw me as a customer." "Go on," Rachel said. "I started following her. On social media, then in real life. I wanted to know where she went. I wanted to know who she was with. And one day, I decided to talk to her. I was going to tell her my true feelings. But she rejected me. 'We can only be friends,' she said. This destroyed me." Marcus pointed to one of the photos. "And you killed her." Tears poured from Richard's eyes. "That night, I followed her. She was walking near Riverside Warehouse. She was going home. I went up to her. I tried again. 'Sarah, please give me a chance,' I said. But she got scared. She started screaming. 'Don't follow me, stay away from me,' she said. And I got angry. My hand pushed her. She fell. She hit her head on something. That metal piece by the shore. And she didn't move. The room was silent. Richard's confession was as light as the sound of wind, but the words were heavy. "Did you realize you'd killed her?" Rachel asked. Richard nodded. "Yes. I checked her pulse. There was none. I panicked. I buried her body by the riverbank. And I didn't tell anyone. For 2 years, I carried this secret." "What about Emily?" Marcus asked. "Why did you kill her?" Richard took a deep breath. Emily was Sarah's sister. When Sarah disappeared, Emily started searching for her. She posted notices on social media. She opened forums. And I felt sorry for Emily. She was lonely too. She was suffering too. I approached her. I sent anonymous messages. I supported her. Then we met. I didn't tell her my real identity, but I spent time with her. And I fell in love with her. Just like with Sarah." Rachel took notes. "But Emily learned the truth." "Yes," Richard said sadly. "Emily was going to a psychic named Margaret Hollis. And that psychic said Sarah was with a red-haired man. Emily started to suspect me. I have red hair. And one day, she started asking me questions about Sarah. 'Did you ever know her?' she said. I denied it, but Emily didn't believe me. She investigated more. And eventually, she learned I'd been following Sarah. She talked to old cafe co-workers. They remembered me. And Emily threatened you, Marcus said. No, Richard said with a bitter smile. Emily just wanted to learn the truth. Tell me, Richard. What happened to Sarah, she said. I couldn't tell her the truth. Because I knew that if I did, I'd lose everything. I'd lose Emily too. So I sent her a note. I said we'd meet at Riverside Warehouse, that I'd explain everything. And when she got there, you killed her, Rachel said. Richard buried his face in his hands. When Emily came, I told her everything. I said Sarah was an accident, that it wasn't intentional. But Emily didn't believe me. You're a killer, she said. I'm going to the police, she said. I tried to stop her. But she screamed. She tried to run. I grabbed her. I squeezed her neck. I just wanted her to be quiet. But I squeezed too hard. And she didn't move. Not again. The room was silent again. The confession was complete. Did Richard's confession satisfy you, or were you expecting more answers? Richard Hughes was responsible for both Sarah's and Emily's deaths. Marcus pointed to one of the photos. What does the word freedom you wrote on the wall mean? Richard laughed slightly, but it was a laugh full of madness. After Emily died, I wrote it on the wall. Because I thought I'd finally be free. No one would know the truth anymore. Sarah's secret would stay with me. But I wasn't freed. I see them every night. In my dreams. Sarah looks at me. Emily screams. There was no freedom. Only hell. Following the arrest, Richard Hughes was taken for psychological evaluation. Dr. Michael Torres, forensic psychologist, met with Richard for hours. The results revealed a complex profile. Richard showed signs of antisocial personality disorder. Lack of empathy, impulse control problems, and chronic feelings of loneliness. Also, he was diagnosed with obsessive love disorder, erotomania. This is when a person believes in a romantic relationship that isn't real or has delusions that someone is in love with them. Dr. Torres's report stated. Mr. Hughes has experienced social isolation since childhood. His relationships with his family are troubled and he has failed in romantic relationships. His interest in Sarah Garrett turned into an unhealthy obsession. Fear of rejection led to anger outbursts and violent behaviors. His feelings toward Emily Garrett followed a similar pattern. Mr. Hughes is emotionally immature and his perception of reality is distorted. While he understands the seriousness of his actions, his sense of remorse is superficial. He poses a danger to society. Richard Hughes's trial began 6 months later. Cook County Courthouse was in the center of Chicago. A magnificent structure, high ceilings, marble columns, and giant windows. The courtroom was packed. Media, victims' families, onlookers, and law students. Everyone was curious about the outcome of this case. The chief prosecutor was an experienced attorney named Linda Morrison. 48 years old, wearing a black suit, her hair in a tight bun, and her gaze sharp. Throughout her career of over 20 years, she had won countless murder cases. Linda could maintain her composure even in emotional cases. But this case had touched her too. 2 young women had lost their lives while only trying to find their loved ones and be happy. The defense attorney was David Chen. 39 years old, of Asian descent, wearing a gray suit with a professional demeanor. David had dedicated himself to protecting the defendant's rights. Richard Hughes's guilt was clear, but David would try to at least get one murder charge reduced to second-degree murder. It would be portrayed as unpremeditated, a sudden burst of anger. Jury selection was complete. 12 jury members and 2 alternates. People of various ages, races, and professions. They would all decide whether Richard Hughes was guilty or innocent. But everyone knew the evidence was overwhelming. The presiding judge was Judge Margaret Thompson. 63 years old, gray-haired, with serious facial features but a fair judge. She had been a judge for 35 years and managed even the most complex cases with skill. The trial began with Linda Morrison's opening statement. Linda stepped before the jury, clasped her hands behind her back, and looked into the eyes of each jury member. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice strong and clear. "The man sitting before you, Richard Hughes, took the lives of two young women. Sarah Garrett was only 25 years old. She was full of dreams. One morning on her way to work, this man followed her. He told her he was in love with her. But Sarah rejected him. And this rejection was unacceptable to Richard Hughes. That night, he killed Sarah. He hit her head and buried her body by the riverbank." Linda paused for a few seconds, letting the impact settle. But the story didn't end there. 2 years later, Sarah's sister Emily got close to learning the truth. Emily loved her sister. She never gave up searching for her. And Richard Hughes was afraid of this. Because he knew that if Emily learned the truth, he'd lose his freedom. So he killed Emily too. He strangled her. And moved her body to another location. Linda turned to Richard and pointed her finger. "This man is a monster. He stole the lives of two innocent women. Only for his own selfish desires. And now, he sits before you. Waiting for justice. My request to you, as jury members, is this: look at the evidence. See the truth. And find Richard Hughes guilty of 2 separate counts of first-degree murder." Linda sat down. The courtroom was silent. Jury members looked at Richard. Richard had bowed his head, his hands clasped on the table. There was no expression on his face. David Chen stood up. "Honorable jury members," he began, his voice softer. "Today here, you will hear about terrible events. 2 women died. This is a tragedy. I don't deny this. But I want to ask you, is Richard Hughes really a monster? Or is he a sick man?" David approached the jury. Richard Hughes experienced social isolation throughout his life. He grew up away from his family. He failed in romantic relationships. And he developed psychological problems. His interest in Sarah Garrett was not healthy. This is true. But this wasn't a planned murder. This is events that developed from an accident and subsequent panic. David described Sarah's death. Sarah rejected Richard. Richard was upset and shocked. An argument broke out. Sarah fell and hit her head. Richard panicked and hid the body. This is a terrible decision. But this is not a planned murder. Then he moved to Emily's death. Emily's death developed similarly. Richard wanted to tell Emily the truth. But Emily said she was going to the police. Richard was afraid and tried to silence Emily. But this isn't a premeditated murder. This is a wrong decision made in a moment of sudden fear and panic. David turned to the jury. My request to you is this: acknowledge that Richard Hughes is guilty. But not first-degree murder. Second-degree murder. Because there's no premeditated intent here. Only fear, panic, and psychological illness. The trial lasted for days. The prosecution presented a strong case. The first witness was Detective Rachel Morrison. When Rachel took the stand, she was professional and confident. Linda Morrison questioned her and Rachel detailed the investigation process. Finding Emily's body, the diary in her apartment, meeting with Margaret Hollis, discovering Sarah's body, and finally Richard Hughes's arrest. Detective Morrison, Linda said. What did you find in Richard Hughes's apartment? Rachel turned to the jury. There was a large board on the bedroom wall. This board was covered with photos of Sarah and Emily Garrett. Hundreds of photos. Taken from social media, cut from newspapers, even secretly taken photos. Richard Hughes had been following these two women for years. Also, we found a blood-stained metal pipe in the closet. This pipe matches the wound on Sarah Garrett's skull. Linda showed the evidence photos. Jury members looked at the photos with disturbed expressions. Defense attorney David Chen cross-examined Rachel. Detective Morrison, when Richard Hughes confessed to you, did you tell him he was speaking without a lawyer? Yes, Rachel said. I read him his rights. I reminded him of his right to an attorney. But Richard said he wanted to talk. And this confession wasn't obtained under pressure? David asked. No, Rachel said firmly. Richard spoke voluntarily. There was no pressure or threat. The next witness was Dr. Patricia Hayes. The medical examiner explained in detail the causes of death for Sarah and Emily. The blunt trauma to Sarah's skull, the strangulation marks on Emily's neck. When the jury saw the photos, their stomachs turned. Dr. Michael Torres also took the witness stand. He presented the psychological evaluation report. He explained Richard Hughes's diagnoses of antisocial personality disorder and obsessive love disorder. Dr. Torres, Linda said. Does Richard Hughes understand that what he did was wrong? Yes, Dr. Torres said. Mr. Hughes understands that his actions were against the law. But emotionally, he cannot fully grasp the seriousness of his actions. There's a lack of empathy. David Chen, in cross-examination, tried to emphasize Richard's psychological problems. Dr. Torres, did Richard Hughes's psychological illnesses affect his behavior? Yes, they did, Dr. Torres said. But this doesn't completely exempt him from guilt. Even with his illness, he understands the consequences of his actions and has decision-making ability. The most emotional testimony was from Diane Garrett. When Emily and Sarah's mother took the stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. Diane had lost weight, her hair had completely turned white, and her face was covered with deep pain. Linda Morrison guided her with gentle questions. Mrs. Garrett, can you tell us about your daughters? Diane spoke in a trembling voice. Sarah and Emily, they were both wonderful girls. Sarah always smiled. She loved helping people. Emily was very sensitive. She was interested in art and creativity. She did seamstress work and created amazing things. When Sarah disappeared, how did it affect Emily? Linda asked. Tears streamed from Diane's eyes. Emily was devastated. She loved Sarah so much. She searched for her every day. Even after the police stopped the search efforts, Emily never gave up. She believed she'd find Sarah. And now they're both gone. Both my daughters. Diane looked at Richard. For the first time, there was not only pain in her eyes, but anger too. That man, she said, her voice trembling. That man took everything from me. He took my daughters. He took my future. I have no reason to live anymore. The courtroom filled with tears. Did Diane Garrett's testimony make you cry too? How does one endure such pain? Jury members, many were wiping their eyes. Richard Hughes, meanwhile, had his head bowed, showing no reaction. The defense presented its own witnesses. Richard's former co-workers described him as calm and harmless. I never would have thought he had violent tendencies, said his former boss. But these testimonies paled next to the prosecution's overwhelming evidence. David Chen decided to put Richard Hughes on the stand. This was a risky move. But David wanted the jury to see Richard's remorse and human side. When Richard took the stand, the courtroom tensed. Everyone was curious about him. Would he speak? Would he confess? Or would he deny? David began his questions. Richard, can you tell us what you felt when you first saw Sarah Garrett? Richard lifted his head and spoke slowly. When I first saw Sarah, it was like the world stopped. She was so beautiful. Not just physically, but spiritually too. She smiled at me and I fell in love with her. But Sarah rejected you, David said. Yes, Richard said, his voice breaking. She rejected me. And I couldn't handle it. I've been rejected all my life. By my family, by my friends, by people I loved. And Sarah rejected me too. I just wanted her to love me. So what happened that night? David asked. Richard took a deep breath. That night, I tried to stop Sarah. I wanted to talk to her. But she was scared. She screamed. And I pushed her. But it wasn't intentional. I just wanted her to be quiet. But she fell and hit her head. I panicked. I tried to save her but it was too late. She was dead. What happened to Emily? David asked. Richard buried his face in his hands. Emily started learning the truth. I tried to lie to her. But Emily was smart. She understood Sarah died because of me. She told me you're a killer. She said she was going to the police. I was scared. I didn't want to lose. I loved Emily. But she hated me now. I just wanted to silence her. But I went too far. I killed her. And now, I see them every night. Their ghosts follow me. Linda Morrison was merciless in cross-examination. Richard, you say you really loved Sarah. But you killed her. What kind of love is this? Richard couldn't answer. And you say you loved Emily too. But you strangled her too. What kind of love is this? Richard remained silent, tears streaming down his cheeks. You don't know how to love, Richard, Linda said. You only know how to possess. And when you can't possess, you destroy. The hearings were completed. Closing arguments were made. Linda Morrison demanded justice from the jury. David Chen emphasized the importance of mercy. Judge Thompson gave instructions to the jury and the jury withdrew for deliberation. If you were a jury member, what verdict would you give Richard Hughes? First-degree murder or second-degree? The deliberation lasted 8 hours. Jury members evaluated every piece of evidence, every testimony. Some were inclined toward second-degree murder. But the majority favored first-degree murder. Because Emily's death was clearly premeditated. Richard had called Emily to a deserted place and killed her there. Finally, the jury returned to the courtroom. Judge Thompson asked for the verdict. The jury foreman stood up. For the murder of Sarah Garrett, we find the defendant Richard Hughes guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom took a deep breath. For the murder of Emily Garrett, we find the defendant Richard Hughes guilty of first-degree murder. Diane Garrett cried out. But this time, it wasn't a cry of pain, but of relief. Justice had finally been served. Richard Hughes showed no reaction. He just sat, staring ahead with empty eyes. Since you've watched the video this far, you must be curious about the ending. Let's see it together. 3 weeks after the conviction, a sentencing hearing was held. At this hearing, it would be determined how long Richard Hughes would remain in prison. In the state of Illinois, the sentence for first-degree murder could range from 20 years to life in prison. Because there were 2 separate murders, the sentences could be served consecutively. Linda Morrison requested the maximum sentence. Your Honor, she said. Richard Hughes took the lives of 2 innocent women. He showed no remorse. He only thought of himself. This man poses a danger to society and should never be released. David Chen requested a lighter sentence. Your Honor, my client suffers from psychological illnesses. He can be treated. He should receive therapy in prison and perhaps one day, he can return to society. Judge Thompson listened to both sides. Then, she addressed Richard Hughes. Mr. Hughes, do you have anything to say? Richard stood up. His face was pale and tired. Your Honor, I'm sorry. I apologize to Sarah's and Emily's families. I wish I could take back time. I wish that night had never happened. But I know that nothing can bring them back. I deserve my punishment. Judge Thompson nodded and announced her decision. Richard Hughes, for the murder of Sarah Garrett, I sentence you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For the murder of Emily Garrett, I sentence you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. These sentences will be served consecutively. That means you will spend the rest of your life in prison. The gavel fell. The decision was final. Richard Hughes was no longer a free man. He would end his life within the cold walls of prison. Months after the trial, Rachel Morrison and Marcus Webb were sitting in a cafe. Snow was falling outside and Chicago was covered with a white blanket. Rachel took a sip of her hot coffee and looked out the window. This case exhausted me, Rachel said in a soft voice. Marcus nodded. Yes. But at least justice was served. Sarah and Emily are at peace now. I hope so, Rachel said. But the families. Diane Garrett is still suffering. She lost her daughters. No conviction can ease that pain. Marcus put his hand on Rachel's shoulder. We did the best we could. We found the killer. We turned him over to the justice system. The rest, hopefully, will heal with time. Rachel looked at Marcus and smiled slightly. You're right. We're just police officers. We can't do more than that. That same day, Diane Garrett was visiting her daughters' graves. Snow was falling softly on the headstones. Diane placed flowers in front of both graves and knelt down. Sarah, Emily, she whispered. Justice has been served now. That man will spend his life in prison. But this doesn't bring you back. You're still gone. And I'm still here. Alone. Diane stayed there for a long time. Snow fell on her hair and shoulders. But she didn't care. She just wanted to be close to her daughters. She wanted to feel their spirits. Finally, she stood up and left the cemetery. Life would continue. It was difficult, painful, but it would continue. Diane would wake up every day and remember her daughters. Their smiles, their voices, their touch. And perhaps one day, these memories would ease the pain. Richard Hughes was in Stateville Correctional Center, a maximum security prison. His cell was small, only a few square meters. A bed, a toilet, and a small sink. There was nothing on the walls. Only cold, concrete walls. Richard lived the same routine every day. Breakfast, an hour in the yard, then back to the cell. Lunch, library time, dinner, and sleep. The days were monotonous. But Richard knew he deserved this. At night, lying in the darkness, he thought about Sarah and Emily. He saw their faces. He remembered Sarah's last moment. The fall, her head hitting, the silence. And he remembered Emily's struggle. Her hand scratching Richard's arms as she tried to breathe, the fear in her eyes. I'm sorry, Richard whispered in the darkness. I'm truly sorry. But this apology didn't change anything. Sarah and Emily were still dead. And Richard was still alive. In prison, but alive. This was a contradiction. An injustice. But life could be unjust. In the city of Chicago, life went on. People were working, loving, living. But in some families, there was a void. The void of Sarah and Emily Garrett. And this void could never be filled. Detective Rachel Morrison sat at her desk, looking at a new file. Another murder. Another family. Another tragedy. The work never ended. But Rachel would continue. Because someone had to fight for the victims. Someone had to find the truth. And so, this dark story came to an end. But in memory, Sarah and Emily Garrett would live forever. Two young women, two souls who only wanted to be happy but became victims of a cruel fate. Riverside Warehouse was still there. Abandoned, silent, and eerie. But there was no longer a grave there. Sarah's body had been claimed by her family and buried next to Emily. Two sisters were finally together. At peace. The Chicago River continued to flow silently. The waters carried their secrets. And the city, as always, was a mixture of life and death, light and darkness, hope and despair. 3 years had passed. Diane Garrett still lived in her house in Chicago. But now that house was not a home, but like a museum. Sarah and Emily's rooms had been preserved exactly as they were when they last left. Photos hung on the walls. Toys, books, clothes, everything was in its place. Diane entered her daughter's rooms every day. She'd sit, trying to smell their scents. But the scents were gone now too. Only memories remained. But something had changed. Diane had joined a support group. A group for families of murder victims. There, she met with people who had experienced similar pain. They shared their stories. They cried. But at the same time, they gave each other strength. Diane was slowly healing. Not completely, she would never heal completely. But she continued to live. She kept her daughter's memory alive. She had established a scholarship fund in their names. For young women, providing scholarships for seamstress and art education. Sarah and Emily were girls who chased their dreams, Diane said in an interview. And I want to help other young women chase their dreams too. In memory of my daughters. Margaret Hollis, the psychic, had quit her work. Emily's death had deeply affected her. Maybe I didn't really have any abilities, she told a friend. Maybe I was just taking advantage of people's desperation. And now, a woman is dead. Maybe because of me. Margaret started going to a therapist. She confronted her past. And changed her life. Now, she volunteered at an adult education center. She taught people to read and write. Real help isn't fortunes and illusions, she said. Real help is giving people concrete skills. Detective Rachel Morrison had been promoted. She was now head of the homicide division. She mentored young detectives. And she always told them the story of Sarah and Emily. This job isn't just about collecting evidence, Rachel would say. This job is about people. About victims. About families. Every file is a life. And we're here to bring justice to those lives. Never forget. Marcus Webb had stayed with Rachel. The pair were now Chicago's most respected detective team. Together, they had solved dozens of murders. But the Sarah and Emily Garrett case always held a special place. Their first big case. Their first real test. Sometimes I think, Marcus said to Rachel one day. What if Emily hadn't gone to that psychic? What if she hadn't responded to Richard's messages? Maybe she'd still be alive. Rachel shook her head. Maybe. But we can't live by what-ifs. Emily loved her sister. And she wanted to learn the truth. That was her right. The guilty one is Richard Hughes. Only him. Marcus agreed. You're right. I just sometimes wish we could prevent these terrible events. We all do, Rachel said. But what police can do is only bring justice afterwards. Prevention is society's duty. Education, awareness, psychological support. If Richard Hughes had gotten help at a young age, maybe none of this would have happened. Richard Hughes, at Stateville Correctional Center, was changing as the years passed. In the first years, he felt sorry for himself and felt like a victim. But over time, he began to face reality. He participated in therapy programs in prison. He had regular meetings with a psychologist. In his 5th year, Richard wrote a letter to Diane Garrett. The letter was long and sincere. Dear Mrs. Garrett, I know this letter will cause you more pain. And perhaps you won't read it. But I have to write. I have to tell you how sorry I am. Sarah and Emily were wonderful people. I hate myself every day for killing them. I wish I could take back time. I wish I hadn't made those decisions. But I can't. The past doesn't change. I was a sick man. Loneliness, obsession, and fears controlled me. But these aren't excuses. I made choices. Bad choices. And now, I'm living with the consequences. I don't have the courage to ask you for anything. Asking for your forgiveness would be too selfish. But I want you to know that I remember Sarah and Emily every day. I keep their memory alive here, in prison. And maybe one day, their souls can forgive me. Respectfully, Richard Hughes. When Diane received the letter, she thought about tearing it up. But she didn't. She read it. And thought long and hard. Could she forgive Richard? No. Never. But at least knowing that Richard was remorseful provided a small comfort. Diane didn't write a response. But she kept the letter. Maybe one day, she'd want to say more. But not now. Now, she'd just focus on living and remembering. In the city of Chicago, the old Riverside Warehouse was finally demolished. In its place, a new park was built. In the center of the park, a small monument was erected. It read, "In memory of Sarah Garrett and Emily Garrett. For love, hope, and justice." The park became a place where families had picnics, where children played. There was no longer darkness and fear. Only light and life. And every year, on November 3rd, the day Sarah disappeared, Diane Garrett came to the park. She placed flowers in front of the monument. And stood silently. Remembering. Sometimes, other families came too. Families of murder victims. They all stood together, silently. They shared their common pain. And they supported each other. Because life is full of pain. But at the same time, it's also full of healing and hope. People, even in the darkest times, can hold on to each other. And perhaps, this holding on is the key to survival. When Rachel Morrison retired, she wrote a book. Titled, In the Shadow of a Lost Sister. The book told the story of the Sarah and Emily Garrett case. But it wasn't just a murder story. It was also a story about family, love, loss, and justice. The book became a bestseller. And many readers were deeply affected by the story. Some had experienced similar experiences. Some just felt empathy. But all learned something from Sarah and Emily's story. The book's final lines read, "Sarah and Emily Garrett are no longer with us. But they will never be forgotten. Because their story is our story. We all sometimes feel lost. We all sometimes search for our loved ones. And we all fight for justice. This story is an ending. But it's also a beginning. A beginning for awareness. A beginning for change. And a beginning for hope. May Sarah and Emily rest in peace. And may we, the living, try to build a better world in their memory." The snowfall had stopped. Chicago's sky was slowly clearing. Sun rays filtered through the clouds, illuminating the city. At Riverside Park, the snow on the monument had melted. The flowers remained fresh. And the wind blew gently. Diane Garrett sat at the edge of the park. In her hand was a childhood photo of Sarah and Emily. Both were smiling. They were happy. Full of hope. "I love you," Diane whispered. "I will always love you." And at that moment, as if by miracle, the wind intensified. It swept through Diane's hair. And a soft whisper came to her ear. As if Sarah and Emily were answering. "We love you too, Mom." Diane closed her eyes and smiled. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe it was the wind's trick. But she didn't care. Because at that moment, she felt her daughters. She felt their presence. And that was enough. Life would continue. The pain would never completely pass. But Diane was no longer alone. Memories, love, and hope supported her. And maybe one day, she would fully heal. The city of Chicago, like a giant tireless organism, continued to live. People came and went. Stories were written and forgotten. But some stories were permanent. Some stories lived forever in people's hearts. The story of Sarah and Emily Garrett was such a story. Tragic, full of pain, but also powerful. Because this story wasn't just about the death of two women. This story was about love. About family bonds. About belief in justice. And most importantly, this story reminded us, life is precious. Every moment, every breath, is a gift. And while we live, we should value our loved ones. Because tomorrow, they may be gone. And then, only regrets remain. Richard Hughes, lying in his prison, had learned this truth. But it was too late. Sarah and Emily were gone. And Richard would live the rest of his life with this regret. Detective Rachel Morrison sat in her retirement home, looking out the window. The sun was setting and the sky was draped in orange-pink tones. In her hand was a cup of tea. And on her face, a peaceful expression. 50 years, she thought. 50 years in law enforcement. Hundreds of cases. Thousands of people. And finally, here I am. Retired. Calm. But I haven't forgotten. Rachel picked up an old file from her desk. Garrett case was written on it. She opened the file and looked at the photos. Sarah's smile. Emily's joy. Richard's blank stare. "I never forgot you," she whispered. "And I never will." She closed the file and put it back in its place. Because some things should be left behind. But never forgotten. And so, this long, dark, and gripping story came to an end. Throughout 6 chapters, we witnessed the terrible events, the forensic investigations, the trials, and the aftermath. Sarah and Emily Garrett are no longer with us. But their spirit will live forever. Healing is slow. Justice sometimes comes late. But hope never dies. And maybe, one day, this world will be safer. More just. More full of love. Until that day, in memory of Sarah and Emily, we will continue to live. May they rest in peace. This case shows us once again that no crime remains hidden. To not miss these kinds of mysterious and terrifying true stories, please subscribe to our channel, like our video, and don't forget to comment. If you want to watch more mysterious and terrifying events, see you in our next videos.